Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. We've got this really interesting piece you shared from The Economist.
Yeah, the title alone grabs you, right? Donald Trump has many ways to hurt Elon Musk.
It really does. So our mission here is, well, pretty straightforward. Let's get into this article, unpack it, and see what it tells us about this very public, very dramatic relationship breakdown.
Right, between Trump and Musk, and the threats flying back and forth.
Exactly. And what this source, The Economist, sees as the potential fallout, for their businesses, their futures.
And what's striking right off the bat in the article is just how fast this all seemed to happen.
Yeah, the speed is something else, especially considering, as the source points out, where things apparently stood just, well, not that long ago. It definitely makes you curious how it flipped so quickly.
Mm-hmm. Let's set that scene the way the article does. It starts by noting something interesting about communication from powerful figures.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, how it used to be all about, like, decoding carefully worded statements. Very nuanced.
Right, reading between the lines.
Exactly. But the article argues Trump kind of threw that playbook out. He often makes these seemingly unfiltered public remarks, threats even.
So the challenge now, according to the source, is figuring out what's real and what's just noise.
Pretty much. And this article uses that exact lens to look at the Trump-Musk split. It takes us back just a few months, reminding us Musk posted on X that he loved Trump.
Oh, I remember seeing this mentioned. The quote was something like,
"As much as a straight man can love another man." That's what the source quotes.
Wow, okay. And then there was that May 30th event the article cites.
Yeah, joint press conference. In the Oval Office, no less.
For Musk leaving his government role, right?
That's it.
Oh.
And the source says Trump called him an incredible patriot, praised his work with the Department of Government Efficiency. DOGE, they called it.
DOGE, got it. So friendly vibes just weeks before this blows up.
Super friendly, it seemed. But then, according to The Economist, bam, it just collapses.
How quickly does the article say this happened?
Astonishingly fast. It says the relationship basically broke down by June 5th.
June 5th. So what, like 5 or 6 days after that Oval Office press conference?
Something like that. Just days.
Incredible. What does the article say was the immediate trigger or the first public shot fired?
Well, the source points to Trump's Truth Social platform. He reportedly posted that Musk was wearing thin and had gone crazy. Why?
Okay, that's pretty direct.
And then right after that, according to the article, came the threat to terminate Musk's government contracts.
Whoa, and Musk's response. The article mentions that too, right, on X?
Oh, yeah, just as public. The source says he claimed Trump's name is in the government's Jeffrey Epstein files.
And suggested that's why they haven't been released.
That is the real reason they have not been made public.
Yeah.
That's the quote the article uses from Musk's post.
Hmm.
A major escalation, obviously.
No kidding. Did it stop there, according to the source?
Nope. The article adds that Musk also publicly agreed with someone on X who said Trump should be impeached.
Okay.
And then, maybe the biggest one, he said he'd start decommissioning the Dragon spacecraft. You know, the one that takes astronauts to the ISS.
Threatening the astronaut transport. That feels huge.
Definitely provocative. Although the article does immediately add a little hint of backtracking.
Oh, how so?
It mentions someone commented telling Musk to cool off, and Musk replied, "Good advice." And he apparently walked back the Dragon threat pretty quickly after that.
Okay, so a massive public fight erupts in under a week. The big question the article tackles then is why? What actually caused this?
Right. The source digs into the stated reasons.
And the main one, according to The Economist's analysis, seems to be this bill, Trump's one big, beautiful bill.
That's what the article focuses on as the primary reason. It details how Musk reportedly reacted. Apparently he was incensed, furious, believed it would just blow up the deficit.
Which would undermine the whole point of DOGE, his government efficiency project.
Exactly. That was his perspective, according to the source. And his criticism ramped up fast.
How so?
The article says on June 3rd, he called the bill a disgusting abomination. Pretty strong words.
Yeah.
Then June 5th, right as things exploded publicly, he added another complaint, that Trump's tariffs would cause a recession.
Okay, so Musk's stated reasons are deficit concerns and tariffs causing a recession. Does the article offer Trump's counter-explanation?
It does. The source is careful to include Trump's side. His claim, according to the article, Musk is actually mad because the bill would kill a government subsidy for electric cars.
A subsidy created under Biden.
That's the one Trump apparently pointed to.
Okay, so we have these two conflicting narratives presented in the article about the cause. Now, let's get into the threats themselves. The article analyzes the potential impact and, I guess, the credibility.
Yeah, it looks at the potential negative outcomes for both, if these threats were actually carried out.
Like Trump losing a big donor and maybe the supportive platform of X.
And Musk seeing his businesses take a hit. Real potential damage on both sides, the article suggests.
But then the source dives into how likely these threats are. What did it say about Trump's threat to cancel SpaceX contracts? That seemed like the biggest stick he was waving.
Interestingly, the article calls that specific threat the least credible.
Least credible, really. Given SpaceX's reliance on government business, why does the source say that?
Well, the argument in The Economist is that pulling those contracts would actually be incredibly disruptive to the government.
Ah, okay. How so?
It would make it really hard for the U.S. to launch anything. The article specifically mentions spy satellites, and the Pentagon depends heavily on Starlink.
So canceling SpaceX contracts would kind of be shooting itself in the foot?
That's the analysis presented in the source.
Yeah.
The government's own reliance makes it a tricky threat to actually follow through on without major self-inflicted problems.
Gotcha. And the article adds another point about SpaceX's resilience, right?
Yeah, it mentions that while government contracts have been huge for SpaceX, its commercial business is booming.
The source cited some estimates.
Quilty Space estimates, yeah, saying commercial revenues nearly tripled last year. So SpaceX might be able to weather it better than you'd think.
Plus, the article throws in that detail about Musk maybe wanting to cancel the Dragon program anyway.
Exactly. It mentions reports that he'd been considering that for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So threatening it might not have been the concession, it seemed.
Okay, so if the big contract threat is maybe less potent,
sure,
does the article point to other risks? It mentions Steve Bannon, right?
It does. It introduces some, let's call them bigger penalties, floated by Bannon, who the article notes is a former Trump advisor and, well, no fan of Musk.
And Bannon's ideas were?
Pretty extreme, according to the source. Things like trying to strip Musk of his U.S. citizenship.
Calling him an illegal alien.
Right. And even talk of nationalizing his companies using the Defense Production Act.
Wow. Okay, that sounds way out there. Does the article give those ideas much weight?
Not really. The Economist pretty quickly labels them as seeming unrealistic.
And why unrealistic, according to the source?
Well, it explains stripping citizenship usually needs a judge to rule there was fraud in getting it.
High bar. And the Defense Production Act.
The article points out it's generally for directing production in emergencies, not really for just seizing companies outright.
Okay, so the article kind of dismisses the really dramatic, headline-grabbing threats, both from Trump directly and floated by Bannon. So where does the source say the real vulnerability for Musk lies?
This is where the article gets really interesting. It says the danger is more in more routine measures.
Routine measures? Like, what does the article mean by that?
It gets specific. It brings up findings from minority staff on the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations.
Okay, and they found?
Get this. When Musk joined the government in January, he and his companies were reportedly facing 65 potential or actual regulatory actions.
65? From how many agencies?
11 different federal agencies, according to the source.
Wow. That's a lot of scrutiny already happening. Does the article give examples of what these actions were about?
Yeah, it lists a few. Accusations about Tesla maybe lying about self-driving tech.
Okay.
Neuralink potentially violating the Animal Welfare Act with its monkey experiments. And SpaceX repeatedly failing to follow the law when launching rockets. Those are the examples the source provides.
So a whole range of existing regulatory headaches or potential ones.
Exactly. And then the article adds this really pointed detail.
What's that?
That while Musk was heading DOGE, he was supposedly able to dismantle some of the very agencies or offices that were investigating his companies.
Seriously? It names one.
Yeah, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau is the example given in the source, which could be relevant, for things like Tesla financing.
Right. So the implication is being inside the tent had its perks in potentially fending off some of this regulatory heat.
That seems to be the connection the article is drawing. And it ties this into a broader point using a quote from Donald Moynihan.
From the University of Michigan's Public Policy School.
That's him. And his perspective, as laid out in the article, touches on why some Silicon Valley figures might have initially backed Trump.
Which was?
The promise of a lighter regulatory touch, basically. A more business-friendly environment. Fewer hurdles.
Makes sense. But Moynihan adds a twist, right? According to the source.
He does. The article quotes him saying, there was always the risk that what they were buying instead were the conditions of oligarchy.
Conditions of oligarchy. Okay. How does the source unpack that idea?
The article explains this view.
Mm.
It's a situation where business leaders who are loyal get to operate pretty freely. But those who fall out of favor or criticize the leader suddenly face the full force of the law. All that regulatory scrutiny we just talked about, potentially.
Got it. So the rules are applied differently depending on your political standing with the person in power.
That's the risk Moynihan highlights, as presented in the article.
And the source explicitly frames Musk's current situation through that lens.
It does. It suggests Musk may be about to discover what life is like outside the tent, suddenly facing those routine measures without the protection of being an insider.
So after all this drama, where does The Economist piece leave things? What's the takeaway on what happens next?
It's pretty open-ended, honestly. The article basically says where things go from here is anyone's guess.
No bold predictions, then?
No. Just this kind of closing thought, a possibility floated by the source. Maybe after experiencing the cold outside the tent, Musk finds a way back inside.
Okay. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive, really unpacking just this one Economist article.
Yeah, it's shown us, based purely on this source, that incredibly fast shift in the relationship.
The very public, almost performative threats.
And the article's analysis suggesting maybe the real danger isn't the big, loud threats, but that existing regulatory machinery kicking into gear.
Right, those routine measures. And we explored that idea presented in the source about political alignment potentially shaping how regulations get applied, that conditions of oligarchy concept.
Definitely. So yeah, this deep dive really focused on extracting the key points and the specific perspective offered only within this article you brought. Not about outside info, just what this source claims.
Absolutely. And sticking just to the source's analysis of the power plays and the vulnerabilities described, it leaves you with a question, doesn't it?
It does. Here's something for you, the listener, to think about. What does this whole episode, as laid out and analyzed in this one article, suggest to you about how personal relationships, raw political power, and, well, business regulation all intersect and maybe collide in today's world?